I'm walking the bull, go, out for the. 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 I'm walking the.
Safe water. Well, once the war between the states broke out, they closed off that river. And they're off. Now, here in Nook Farm, being the wealthiest neighborhood in the United States, we've got every modern convenience. Yeah, some of them don't work so well. Lovely day we've got here, holiday weekend. Well, what do you think? I'm glad you like it, so does the horse. This is our carriage house, and of course it houses the carriage and the winter sleigh and all of our animals, the horse, the cows, the ducks and geese, the dogs, the cats. However, on the side here is where our Irish Keltman Patrick McAleer lives, with his wife and this year 7 children. He explains why Patrick takes the drop. Well, Patrick himself told me he recently read a book on the evils of drink, so he gave it up reading. He's Irish, what you expect. But I know you did not come to see Patrick's 4-room apartment. You came to see the larger house beyond it. Now, what do you think of this house?
Gorgeous.
A bit larger, yeah. Now, this house, along with the carriage house, of course, was designed for Mr. and Mrs. Clemens by a New York architect named Edward Tuckerman Potter. And he normally designs churches, so he could not resist putting some of those church touches inside. But I heard that while this house was being built, a Hertford newspaper came, they wrote a story about it, called it one of the oddest looking buildings in the state. I do not entirely disagree, it is a bit odd. In fact, even Mr. Clemens, he does not disagree. I heard him telling a friend, you know, it would not do to call my house a mongrel. People might find that offensive. So I just call it eclectic. There's a writer's word for it. But even though he's got the most eclectic home, Mr. Clemens is not the only famous writer in Nook Farm. Now you see the grey cottage behind the big flowering tree. That is the home of Harriet Beecher Stowe. And Mr. Clemens would probably not want me to highlight this, but when he first moved to this Nook Farm neighbourhood, she was the most famous writer in the world, not him, because she'd written a book on slavery called Uncle Tom's Cabin. Now, she is a lovely lady, older lady, but lovely. But if I were a gossip, which I'm not, I would tell you her sister throws wild parties in this neighbourhood and she talks to the dead. And one of her brothers was sued for some over familiarity with a good friend's wife, and him a clergyman. That's not gossip, I'm afraid, that's just common knowledge. No need to dwell upon it. I'm afraid I got a bit of bad news, I may as well tell you right off the bat here. It's such a beautiful morning, and of course this is a holiday weekend. The family has already rushed off about all of their holiday errands. In fact, I saw Mr. Clemens with, surprisingly, his best friend, the minister, the Reverend Joseph Twitchell, heading off towards the mountain over there for one of their walks. So, Lord only knows when they'll be back. They can take hours at that. So, I'm sorry, I know you came to see him, but, well, maybe I'll make it back before we leave. In the meantime, we'll try to observe or be unobserved. Right, now I've got to give you the rules of the house, and I'm afraid I got some more bad news, especially for you, yeah. I'm afraid there is, once we pass through these doors, there is no photography inside. The family values its privacy, and just watch your head right here. Down below it's fine. Now this, as I said, was all modernized in the 20th century, which is why it's got cinder block and wallboard and why the rooms are all broken up down here, because this was used for other purposes last century. But here, when the family lived here, it was mostly open and it was all brick and lath, as you can see. You can also see, you probably noticed there were grates all over the walls and ceilings. That was because they had this, a coal burning furnace. It was supposed to provide central heat. It didn't. They didn't have an electric fan, so it didn't provide a whole lot of heat beyond the direct grate area, hence the fireplaces. Now also down here, when it wasn't broken up like this, they had their cold storage of fruit and vegetables and their wine cellar and their big laundry room. We have commemorative things. We've got family photos. We've got our rogues gallery of living history characters. We've got 7 characters. We all tell true stories, but they're all different stories in different years. We've got Katie Leary, the lady's maid. We've got our coachman, Patrick McAleer. The Reverend Joseph Twitchell, who was Sam's best friend, and also performed the shotgun wedding between Willie Taylor and Lizzie Wills up in the library. We've got our butler, George Griffin, Mrs. Clemens currently, Susie Clemens, our eldest daughter currently. That's our current Katie Leary. Rose gallery of the family, and some of the people that occupied this house after the family moved out. Some of the successive tenants of this house. In 1903, the Bissell family, an insurance executive at the Hartford Life Insurance Company, bought this house. And in the teens, the 19-teens, they moved out and rented it to a private boys' school called Kingswood School. And there's the Kingswood's baseball team. Kingswood is now Kingswood Oxford, a private co-ed school about 2 miles from here in West Hartford. When Kingswood moved out, the Bissell family sold this house to a developer who decided to tear it down to build apartments. Fortunately, that did not happen. Here, as I said, you can try on, these are in the way, actually, of the hats, so let me move that to the side. You can try on hats, if you can fit into them, you can try on jackets or underwear. This is what Lizzie would have spent her Mondays doing, the laundry. This, of course, would not be squished into a corner. It would be most of this room. Would be the laundry. All the underclothes that created what the lady wore on the outside. And this is your 19th century washing machine. They came in different sizes, but there it is. That's what you had. Larger, maybe, and a scrub board, and an agitator, which is only move the water as fast as the washerwoman could make it move. The spin cycle.
Yes.
And of course, the dryer was the air, mostly outside, except in long periods of bad weather, and then you'd have a separate drying room down here. And then, since nothing was perma-press, everything got the iron and the starch. And these had heated, wrapped separate handles that you put on top because you can't lift it up like I'm doing now, or you'd scorch your hand. But the idea was that they would be heated on the stove in the kitchen. There's a dumbwaiter in the kitchen. So the laundress would be ironing. After about 12 to 15 minutes, this would get too cool. So she'd send it up the dumbwaiter. There'd be a second one heating up on the stove in the kitchen. The cook would do a trade, take the cool one, put it on the stove, put that one, and send it back down. And that saved time, and also running up and down the stairs carrying something that was, red hot iron. And you're free to pick up things too. So if you want to pick up a Victorian flat iron, feel free.
Whoa. It's pretty heavy.
There's a reason they're called irons today. Yeah. Can I answer any questions about any of this or about the house? I gave you up until the 1920s. I can answer further questions about the family, the furniture, the house.
They built the house, they didn't purchase.
Well, they built it, obviously they paid for it.
What I mean is they did.
No, it wasn't already here.
Right.
They had it built for them. They actually moved to the city in 1871 and rented a house. In fact, they rented a house from Harriet Beecher Stowe that was diagonally across from her on Forest Street. It's still there, but it's buried behind some apartments, almost directly opposite Hartford High School, while they were looking for the plot of land to buy and build on. That is Mark Twain's one money-making invention, the Mark Twain self-pasting scrapbook. How it works. It's falling apart, unfortunately, but these pages all had 3 columns, newsprint wide in those days, 3 columns of dried glue. And when you wet them, voila, you had a self-pasting scrapbook. But in between each blank sheet, there was, you can see some blue, edges of blue. That was the sheets of perforated construction paper that were between, and that kept the blank sheets from self-pasting themselves shut.
Yes.
But then, when you completed a 2-page spread, you would tear out the construction paper to preserve the binding, because that way you were subtracting from the book as you were adding to it, so you wouldn't snap the binding open when you were halfway done. And he made about $20,000 from this. So it was very successful.
What is
This represents Patrick McAleer, the coachman's monthly check, his paycheck. He was the highest paid servant in the house at $600 a year. Lizzie and the other housemaids were the lowest paid servants at $150 a year. George was slightly lower. He was at about $550, and it went down from there. Everybody did get nice Christmas bonuses, 5 to 10% of your yearly salary, in fact. So Lizzie got $10 in bonus money, which that was like a month's pay, yeah.
What did he die of?
Well, probably, it said that he died of grief.
Oh, great.
Of grief because he outlived most of his family.
Oh.
He also, let's face it, died of cardiopulmonary disease because he been smoking probably since he was 10. But in fact, his doctors told him he needed to stop smoking, so in about the last 6 months of his life, he cut down to about 6 or 7 cigars a day. So that was essentially giving up smoking for him. And I said, that probably killed him. Quitting. He cleaned all the tar out of his lungs and nothing was holding it together after that. Yeah, these are all obviously some of the family. They're out on the Ombra, the big covered porch with their dog, Hash.
And did he speak any languages besides English?
Some people, well, he would say he barely spoke that. You know, I'm sure he spoke a little German because he picked it up because they spent a lot of their vacation time in Germany. So he probably did have some German. In fact, I know he did, but I'm sure he had German with a southern accent.
And the children, of course.
The children spoke German.
Yes.
They spoke French.
Hmm.
They may have had a little bit of Italian, but yeah, they all spoke some German.
Who is that on the left?
This is the daughter God was in no hurry to meet, the one who outlived her father, Clara. She outlived everybody. She lived to be 88 years old and didn't die until 1962. She helped get what they called themselves then, the Friends of Hartford. Now it's the Mark Twain Memorial Foundation that owns this house. She helped them acquire it. She helped give us back some furniture for it and told us how the rooms should be laid out. So she was...
And who is this?
This is Mark Twain. This is the real Reverend Joe Twitchell, his friend. They're actually about the same age, but it looks Twitchell aged a little bit better. He probably smoked less and exercised a little more. More of their theatrical, more of the love chase and the Prince and the Pauper photos.
Where did they go after they left Hartford?
Well, when they first moved in 1891, before they sold the house, they had to move because of financial difficulties.
Okay.
They rented a flat in London and found jobs for most of their servants for while they were away. They were planning to come back.
Okay.
He made back the money he lost on an international speaking tour in 95, 96. However, in 96, not everyone went on that speaking tour. Susie, his eldest daughter, decided to come back home. She was studying voice lessons. Jean had stayed back home. They stayed with Katie O'Leary up in Elmira, the lady's maid. And they came back to Hartford when the tour ended and all the money was back, and they were going to go up, join the family in England, and then everyone was going to move back here. Unfortunately, on arriving in Hartford, Susie developed some strange symptoms, headaches, neck aches. She wasn't feeling well. So Katie brought her home to recuperate and called the doctor. It turns out Susie had spinal meningitis. So they sent some cryptic cables over to London about why they weren't going to be on the next boat. Olivia didn't like that. So she and Clara came home, took the next steamer out to take care of Susie. But while they were still crossing the Atlantic, Sam, who was still in London, got a cable that read, "Susie was peacefully released this morning." She was 24. Livy and Clara found out on the boat, and they found out officially, really, their neighbors all met the boat, their neighbors, their minister, their doctor, their maid, who told them everything. And Livy just went to pieces. She said, "How can I bring myself to live there again?" So they didn't, but they thought they would. The time that they didn't, they mostly were up in Elmira. But by 1903, her health was deteriorating rapidly. So her doctor said they should move to a warm climate, which neither Elmira nor Hartford was. So they sold the Hartford home and rented a villa just outside Florence, Italy, because it's warm and they loved Europe. And unfortunately, a warm climate does not cure heart disease. Livy died in 1904. Sam went back to wandering. He rented a brownstone in Manhattan for a couple of years, and finally decided to come back to Connecticut. He built a new home called Stormfield in Redding, Connecticut, which is about 60 miles southwest of Hartford. And Jean moved in with him. Now, she was still single despite being the incredible old maid age of about 28, because she had epilepsy, which is probably why she could not go traipsing all over the world. And she never was able to control it. She had the grand mal seizures all her life, sometimes more than once a day. So she was in and out of hospitals. But at that point, and her doctors told her she shouldn't marry, it would be bad for her health. So she was working as her father's secretary. Christmas morning of 1909, when Katie O'Leary, who is now Sam's housekeeper, went to wake Jean, she discovered she had had a grand mal seizure in her bathtub and died of a heart attack. Prior to even beginning to build this house, back in 1872, they lost their first child, their only son, Langdon. This one, oops, he left. Langdon, who is, this is as old as he got. He was a year and a half and he died of diphtheria. So Sam Clemens outlived 3 of his 4 children and his wife, and that is probably what led him to declare in January of 1910 that having come in with Halley's Comet, he expected he would go out. And then there was Clara.
Did Clara have any children?
She did have one. She married twice, but she, like her father, enjoyed gadding about as a young woman. So she didn't, and she was a concert singer in Europe and around. So she didn't marry until, compared in those days, very late, about 35. So she only had the one daughter when she was about 36 or so, 1910 born. And her daughter Nina decided to become a movie star because that was the era she grew up in, the golden age of Hollywood. And unfortunately, she became a Hollywood party girl instead and had developed a bit of an addiction problems and was in and out of rehab. So she never did marry or have children. So there are no lineal descendants. That's why the Mark Twain Memorial Foundation is the owner of the house. And they acquired it because a group of influential Hartfordites banded together when they heard that some idiot was going to tear this down and build apartments. And they fought City Hall. The lady next to Sarah was one of them. She was a preservationist named Catherine Seymour Day. But more importantly, she was the great niece of Harriet Beecher Stowe. So she had a dog in this fight. She bought the big stone house that's directly across from us, was built in the 1880s for a lawyer named Franklin Chamberlain. She bought it in the 1920s and it's now part of the Stowe property. And she helped them. Clara because she was a concert singer, she threw a concert to raise money for the house. I'm sure she threw her name around liberally. And they raised the money and they bought the house from the developer. And that used up all their money, and now it was 1929. So they had to rent the house out to raise more money to restore it to the way it looked when the family lived here. So they rented the first floor to Hartford Public Library as a children's library branch. And then the developer did all kinds of messing with the second and third floor and the carriage house, and they rented them out as apartments. And that's one reason the only bathroom that we can show you is the one for the mahogany room, because that room was never, altered structurally. All the plumbing was still in place, the fixtures were in place, but the ones upstairs, they modernized all, because nobody wanted 19th century plumbing. They modernized and they moved, so we don't know. We think there was plumbing in the girls' bathroom. We believe there was a flush toilet, but because it was moved about so much, we don't know where the lines were. But finally, by the 1950s, late 50s, between the rental income, the newly formed National Endowments for the Arts and the Humanities, corporate and private donors, they could begin restoring. All the hand stenciling was relocated under the things that were put on top of it. It was still there, so it was re-stenciled, redone, re-stenciled. They found some of the original wallpapering and tracked down the manufacturers and had it reproduced. They spent years and years and years tracking down furniture. Clara gave us back some. She gave us the angel bed. She also gave other museums some of our stuff. But they auctioned off a lot of their belongings when they sold the house. So with the auction list, which I'm going to guess she also provided, they've been hunting for things. So every room has some of their belongings. If I was talking about them, it's their belongings. In some cases, we couldn't get theirs, but we got their in-laws. So it was things that they used in other places. If we couldn't get any with a family connection, it is all period. Clara told us what major pieces needed to be in each room and basically where. So it's an ongoing project. It's constantly you're trying to improve what we've got, find new things, buy old things that we found belong to them. We're trying to get his typewriter. I think we lost the bidding on it, but we were trying to get it. You know, various things. So, have you got any other questions?
And your name was Lily Taylor?
Lizzie.
Lizzie
L-I-Z-Z,
Taylor.
Yes.
Lizzie.
L-I-Z-Z-I-T. Not to be confused with Livy, L-I-V-Y, Clemens. People call us both Lily. But, yeah, she was a housemaid. She was a bad girl. She did have to get married, and then she left the employment of this family. But according to her husband, who Sam ran into in the city, Lizzie opened up a tea shop and was attracting all the best trade. So, happy ending theoretically. So,
Well, thank you for
you're
the
welcome.
tour.
Now your tickets include.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'll take you up each.
I'm walking the bull, go, out for the. I'm walking the bull, go, out for the. I'm walking the bull, go, out for the. I'm walking the bull, go, out for the.